One of the hardest things for veterans is to keep going forward in these cases despite the foot dragging by the VA that makes these go on and on and on, sometimes for years and years and years, even decades. And spouses often play an absolutely critical role in supporting the veteran and encouraging them to continue to stick with it despite the delays and discouraging results. But the other important role that spouses play is to provide information, to provide testimony at hearings, to provide written statements, and that can cover a wide variety of information that may be important or relevant in any particular case.
Welcome to the Victory Over VA podcast, a podcast about empowering veterans to overcome denied disability claims. Each week, we deliver critical insights to help you understand the disability process, veterans' benefits, and how to take control of your legal rights. Now here's your host, Attorney Francis Jackson.
Hello and welcome to Victory Over VA, your guide to understanding your VA disability benefits. If you are a veteran applying for VA disability benefits, subscribe to our podcast for all the information about VA disability. So welcome to our episode today, and let me tell you a little about us. I'm Francis Jackson. This is Kristian Terison. We're from the law firm of Jackson and MacNichol, where we specialize in getting justice for veterans on their VA disability claims. So what's this about? Well, today we're going to talk about the role of the spouse in VA disability claims. And who is this show for? Well, obviously it's for veterans. And today there's a particular emphasis on veteran spouses, as well as this show is also for other relatives, friends, anyone who is supporting veterans in the community. Our goal is to get the information out about how folks should apply for VA benefits and some of the particular pieces and issues and problems that go along with that process. So, without further discussion, let's take it away.
All right. Sadly, it's a tale as old as time. You have the veteran who's saying, I'm fine, everything's fine. And you have the spouse who is saying, no, it's not. I'm seeing XYZ symptoms and irritability and all these other things. And so we wanted to do this episode today to talk about how a spouse can participate and support their veteran partner in a disability claim. So I guess to begin with, using that classic example, how can a spouse's observations and daily interactions with their veteran partner significantly impact the success of a disability claim?
Well, I think actually that's one of two important roles that spouses play. And so let me touch that for a moment and then we'll come back to your specific question. Veteran spouses often play one or both of two roles in the VA disability arena. One of the hardest things for veterans is to keep going forward in these cases despite the foot dragging by the VA that makes these go on and on and on, sometimes for years and years and years, even decades. And spouses often play an absolutely critical role in supporting the veteran and encouraging them to continue to stick with it despite the delays and discouraging results. But turning to your specific question, the other important role that spouses play is to provide information, to provide testimony at hearings, to provide written statements, and that can cover a wide variety of information that may be important or relevant in any particular case. But let me give some examples. Say that the spouse and the veteran and spouse have been together since he or she was in the service. One very powerful piece of evidence that we frequently have to reach out to spouses to get is a discussion of how the veteran has changed from the time they went into the service until they left. And that can be either in physical or mental or both kinds of ways. In physical claims, it often comes up when the VA is denying a claim, say for a back injury. And the spouse can say, hey, I was with him when he went in the service. He didn't have any back problems. And then he had these incidents in the service. And ever since then, he's complained about back pain. He's had a hard time picking things up. He's been going to doctors on and off. You know, it's never been bad enough that he had to have back surgery or anything. But he's had a lot of trouble with it for years and years and years. It's been consistent. It hasn't gone away. And that lets you get behind the VA's favorite argument in these kinds of cases where they say, oh, well, sure, he hurt his back in the service, but it was just a minor thing and he got all better. And his problems now are because he's old or because he had some incident after service. And spousal evidence is often critical to defeat those kinds of challenges by the VA. Another kind of spousal evidence that is critical in mental health cases is to talk about changes in personality and behavior from the time someone went in the service until they returned. Particularly in cases where the veteran was involved in combat, it's often difficult for those veterans to really talk about the incidents that they were involved in and its impact on them. A lot of them struggle to put those things into words, and it's very helpful often to have the spouse come in and talk about, well, you know, his behavior is now different. At night, he goes to bed with a loaded gun beside the bed. Before going to bed, he goes around and checks all the windows to make sure they're all locked, double locks the door, you know, has now bought a dog that he keeps in a fence around the house so that anyone coming near the house, the dog will alert. You know, that's simply one example, but there are many, many examples where testimony by the wife about the behavior has been critical to a mental health claim. So there are both of those roles that are truly important.
No, absolutely. How about when it comes to compensation and pension exams? Is there anything that a spouse can do to support a veteran partner there?
That one's more complicated. Sometimes the examining physician will allow a spouse to come in and participate and discuss the symptoms and the behavior and so on. Sometimes they won't. But when they will, I think it's often helpful. So many veterans are inured to the idea that you don't complain, you struggle on through no matter how bad it is, and don't recognize that in the VA system, where they're trying to get the details of your symptoms, it's critical to complain. It's critical to explain the difficulties you're having and not to minimize them. And unfortunately, so many veterans just minimize the difficulties that they're having, whether you call that being macho or you call that a military mindset. It doesn't really matter what you call it, but the reality is that many veterans, unfortunately, for whatever reason, tend to minimize their symptoms, and it is often extremely important to have the wife, or if it's a female veteran, the husband, explain what is really going on behind that stiff upper lip or that macho facade, as the case may be. So it's very helpful when the physician or psychologist who's conducting the C&P examination will allow the spouse to come in and participate, even if it's after speaking with the veteran initially. But unfortunately, they don't always, and it appears to be discretionary with the examiner.
You'd touched upon this with your earlier point about how a spouse can be there to lend support to keep going with the lengthy, disability claims process and a lot of the frustrating setbacks that can happen there. but I wanted to get into a few more specifics about how a spouse can help with communication with the VA and with medical providers, especially in situations where the veteran's symptoms may be a barrier to that. I'm thinking specifically of some of the psychiatric conditions that arise.
Yeah. That's a common problem. One thing that we see frequently, as you were alluding to, is that veterans will have mental health symptoms that cause them to isolate or to be paranoid, frankly, and not want to deal with anyone from the VA, including VA physicians or psychologists who might either, one, record symptoms that are important to the claim or assist with treatment of those symptoms. So it's often important to have the spouse as kind of an ameliorating influence, kind of keeping things in check with keeping the veteran from withdrawing from treatment or refusing to participate in CMP exams or otherwise behaving in ways that will damage his claim.
Oftentimes when I'm talking with a veteran spouse, they'll be surprised that they can, not only attend a board hearing, but actually testify to the symptoms they're observing in their partner. What should spouses know about providing that kind of testimony at a board hearing?
Sure. The basic rule at board hearings is that any information that may support the claim can be brought in. And as you've already said, that often includes the testimony of a spouse. It's not limited to the testimony of a spouse. It can be other friends, relatives, people who knew the veteran during service may have information about what happened during service. But it is very common for spouses to have accumulated information about the veteran over time, particularly observations about behavior. And so those observations are often important evidence, and spouses are certainly entitled to offer them at a hearing. I think anyone who is preparing a hearing and knows what they're doing will typically want to interview the spouse and see whether there is information that he or she may have that would be of assistance in proving the claim. But in answer to your specific question, what I would want spouses to know is that their information can be offered and often is very important in supporting a claim, and that if they're dealing with someone who is either not represented at all or is represented by a veteran service officer or an agent who may not be particularly expert in these things, that they can offer to that person that they have information and that that information might be introduced at the hearing, and that can be done either in the form of a written statement or in oral testimony. So I would want spouses to know that's an option.
Definitely. All right, so what are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes that spouses should avoid and be aware of when supporting a veteran through the disability claims process?
Well, it seems to me that the biggest pitfall that I see in these cases is that the veteran just gets so distressed with how long these things drag on and some of the just unfair decisions that get rendered and the need to appeal those, that they feel like giving up. And I think probably the most significant role that the spouse can play is to helping them understand the need for patience and persistence to get to the end of these claims. It breaks my heart that every year we have several clients with excellent claims who just give up. They just can't stand the ongoing pressure, aggravation, depression, whatever you want to call it, of having this claim out there that's not getting resolved, that they certainly believe they're fully entitled to, but that the VA is being difficult about granting. And I think the single most important role that spouses play in these claims, of the several that we've talked about, I think the single most important one is helping the veteran get through the process helping them to stay the course. Because, we win almost every one of these cases where the veteran can manage to stick with us to the end. But sometimes you're talking more than 10 years before we get to the end, just because of the unconscionably slow process. And so it's very hard for some veterans, especially those with psychiatric issues or those who are physically seriously ill, to just be able to stay with it and not give up. And I've had so many veterans over the years come to me and say, I can't stand it anymore. I can't have this going on. I need to get on with my life. I want you to drop my claim. And obviously I always try to persuade them that that's not the right solution, but sadly, every year a few veterans with excellent claims end up just giving up and going away. And I don't think that breaks any hearts at the VA.
Yeah. As one veteran put it to me, I'm not giving up because if I give up, the VA wins.
That's right. And unfortunately, sometimes that's exactly what happened. They win by default.
Right. Can you talk a little bit about aid and attendance benefits and housebound benefits?
Sure.
And how those pertain to spouses caring for severely disabled veterans?
Absolutely. Aid and attendance and housebound are categories that the VA recognizes as calling for a modest additional amount of monthly benefits for disabled veterans. Typically, aid and attendance is the more common. What that is the veteran has to demonstrate that the combined effect of all of his service-connected disabilities, and not including the impact of any non-service-connected disabilities, is such that he or she requires assistance with basic activities of daily living, sometimes abbreviated ADLs. And those include things like getting dressed, bathing, eating, toileting, all kinds of just basic day-to-day activities that humans have to do. If the veteran is sufficiently disabled that they need help with those basic day-to-day activities, then the VA will recognize that they are entitled to aid and attendance and will provide, once the proof is presented to them, an additional amount each month to help with the veteran's care. There is a similar process with what the VA calls housebound, and the only difference between aid and attendance and housebound is that with housebound you're talking about a situation where the veteran's combined service-connected disabilities, again not considering any non-service problems, is so severe that the veteran is effectively confined to his or her home. And typically that's usually about mobility. Folks who have mobility issues and cannot easily use a wheelchair, or have to have the kind of wheelchair assistance where it's another person who's managing the wheelchair. It's not the veteran moving it forward by using the hand grips. And it can also involve veterans who are unable to leave their homes for psychological reasons. We've won cases over the years where the person was housebound based on psychological problems, especially things like agoraphobia. But it can be any combination of physical and or mental disabilities that are service-connected that collectively keep the veteran from leaving home, that will entitle them to the additional benefit under housebound.
Okay. We're just about out of time for today, but I wanted to ask one last question. Just what would your key pieces of advice be to spouses who are, new to navigating the VA disability system, and are trying to support their veteran partner through this process?
Well, I think there are two roles that are important. One, my experience has been that women are much better about details than men. And when you combine that with the fact that many veterans, for whatever reasons, have an attitude that they need to tough it out and not whine about their symptoms, it's often really important for the spouse to be involved in presenting those symptoms to the folks who are doing the medical treatment, to whoever's helping with the veteran with his claim, if anyone is, and to the VA adjudicators who the veteran's dealing with. The other rule, though, that I think is actually the more critical one is one we touched on a little while ago with, it's very difficult for many veterans to sustain participation in anything over time because of their mental and physical disabilities that are what bring them to the point of applying for VA compensation to begin with. But I can't tell you how important it is, how critically important it is for veterans to be able to stick it out and get to the end of the process and get their benefits. You know, for lots of these veterans, an award of 100% benefits is truly life-changing. And so getting to that point is critically important. And every year I see cases where the veteran just wants to give up, just can't stand the aggravation or irritation or depression that comes from having this claim. It just moves so slowly and doesn't get resolved over time. And I think more than anything else, the biggest thing that spouses can do is to help the veteran recognize that it's just so important to stick with these claims and get them to the end, because the level of success, if you get a veteran who can stick with it to the end, is very high. You know, we win almost all of these cases, but the ones we lose are the ones that go away, you know, where the veteran just can't stand to stay with it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us this week on Victory Over VA. Please be sure to subscribe and tune in again next week.
We hope to see you then.
Thanks for joining us this week on the Victory Over VA podcast. Make sure to visit our website, veteransbenefits.com/podcast, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, or via RSS, so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes, or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. If you like this show, you might want to check out our free consultation to see how we can help you with your denied claim. Simply go to veteransbenefits.com and fill out the form. You fought for us. Now let us fight for you. And be sure to tune in next week for our next episode.